Thank you, everyone, for being so obedient. That's just brilliant. I would like to welcome you here this morning. I'm Michelle McKenzie, CEO of Shelter WA, and thank you for those that have come out on this cold and miserable Perth morning, and welcome to all of our Zoom people. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Whadjuk Noongar country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to elders across WA because we do have people on Zoom from the Kimberley down to the Great Southern. So as I said, this event is being held in person and via Zoom. So can we give all our Zoom people a big wave? I hope that's not too cheesy. Zoom people, would you like to wave back? Great. Now, you're welcome to tweet these proceedings and any observations you have from our event. We're a bit of a Twitterverse here at Shelter WA, and our hashtag is #SWA Solution Summit, and it will be on all our slides. Just some housekeeping. Could you please turn off your mobile phones? Now, there's some renovations happening here at the platform, so if you need the bathrooms, you need to go up to the 4th floor, and they're in the same location on that side. And in case of an emergency, please follow instructions from platform staff, not from me. So once again, thank you for attending today. People that know the Shelter family would know that our vision is that all people in WA have housing that enables us to thrive, and that having a home is absolutely fundamental. And COVID showed us the importance of a home to keep everyone safe and well. Last week, the draft WA infrastructure strategy was released, and it showed that housing security is increasingly difficult for many West Australians. Our population and household structures are changing, living costs are increasing, and more people are requiring housing assistance. And for those in the services field, that's something that you see and feel every day. The housing shortage is impacting on economic and social productivity across the state, and the health and mental health of thousands of West Australians who are living in housing stress. Now, we do know that the Housing and Community Services Ministers and the Department of Communities are working on initiatives to address this housing shortage, and they're putting new investment into social housing and homelessness services. That's really welcome, and it's laying a really strong foundation for us as a sector to work with government to increase the rate and increase the pace of investment so we have the housing that everybody needs across WA. So today we're keen to deliver solutions and to hear from people. We've got fantastic panellists who will share some of the initiatives that they're doing to unlock housing and address some of the housing shortages across the state. So the aim of today's summit is to get a shared understanding of current issues, and we've got some fabulous speakers, so thank you. To get an overview of some of the solutions that Shelter has put together with our members and partners, and to hear from practitioners and experts about what they're doing to bring these solutions to life. So thank you again, panellists and speakers. I know everyone's really busy and we really appreciate your time. So I'd like to now introduce Sarah Kane, the CEO of Circle Green. Sarah is the CEO, and Circle Green, for those that don't know, is a not-for-profit community legal centre providing a range of specialist legal assistance, which includes tenancy. Until recently, Sarah was on the board and chairperson for CLC's, Community Legal Centres Australia, and the project manager coordinating the merger of employment law, Tenancy WA, and the humanitarian group that led to Circle Green. So please, round of applause for Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone, and welcome and hi to everyone that's joining us online. I'd like to also start today by acknowledging that we're meeting on Noongar Budja and acknowledge the Whadjuk people and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as Michelle mentioned, we are a community legal centre, so the lens that I'll be presenting our information through to you today is around the things that people are contacting our service for legal advice, particularly in relation to tenancy, what we're seeing and what we think the solutions are. So just to give a bit more of a context so you get an understanding of the sorts of services that we provide, we mainly provide telephone legal advice to private and public rental tenants, community housing tenants, boarders and lodgers, and long stay caravan park residents. We also provide a lawyer at the Duty Advocacy Service at the Perth Magistrates Court, and I'll be sharing some data about what we're seeing there in terms of court listings and around tenancy matters. We provide a community support worker hotline for people working in this space, particularly around tenant advocates working around the state supporting tenants in their areas, particularly in regional areas. We provide a central resource unit for the tenancy network, so quarterly opportunities for everyone working in this space to come together and share what's happening on the ground level. And we also provide a range of community legal education to both tenants and community workers around tenancy law and issues. So that's the space we're working in and the lens that we share what we know today. So what is the problem? We have been receiving since January to June, so the last 6 months, over 15,000 calls to our service just for tenancy advice. So that's not any of those other areas of law that we practice in, just tenancy. Each day we also receive, on top of those calls, 30 web inquiries, requests for legal assistance, and clients are currently waiting up to 2 weeks for an appointment with a lawyer about their matter. Now, if you put that in context of actually the urgency and what people are experiencing, that's quite a wait when you're about to face eviction to homelessness. So we provide about 100 advices a week. Before COVID, and I will be sharing the data of what we were experiencing before COVID, so you, again, get a context of what we're actually seeing. Before the merger and before COVID, Tenancy WA was receiving about 30 calls a day for legal advice and about 70 advices a week. So you can already see the difference in terms of demand there. So what were we seeing in January, 60 days prior to the end of the moratorium? We were starting to get clients calling us. Now, if you think about, we provide tenancy advice in relation to about 30 issues. So people call us with a range of issues that they may be experiencing out in their tenancies. So today I'll be talking specifically around terminations of their lease, rent increases and notice and bonds. So around 60 days prior to the end of the moratorium, we were starting to get calls coming through from people saying, I've been given notice of a rent increase. I've been given a notice that my landlord's ending my lease early or terminating it. What do I do? What rights do I have? So you can see there at the front of the graph is January, February, March 2020, so prior to COVID. The red line indicates rent arrears. So you can see that we generally did get quite a lot of people ringing around rent arrears, but the green line shows rent increase. So these are the number of advices we give around a particular issue each month, given in the context of all of the issues that we advise on. So you can see there where I've circled the graph, that is January, February. The peak of it hits in April, which is the start of when the moratorium ended. So that's where people were getting rent increases and they were starting to move into arrears. You can see also again in early 2020, it was pretty stable, people getting notice of termination. You can see also through the middle block there, and similarly to before where the moratorium was in place, the data was quite low and quite stable. Again, we see the peak where people are required to have, their leases are terminating and facing eviction is again in April, May, June. So where did we land? So before the election and in January, we were seeing these issues. We were anticipating what we were going to see come the end of the moratorium. In April, the first day after the moratorium, we were getting calls of not just notice of rent increase or notice of leases finishing, we were getting, it's been terminated, I'm being threatened with eviction, I'm being evicted, I'm going to be homeless. So within those 60 days, people were going, okay, I've got 60 days to find somewhere, I've got 60 days to work out what I'm going to do about that rent increase, then bang, post-moratorium, it's D-Day, I'm being evicted. And I have been looking for somewhere to rent, can't find any. Rental vacancies lower than 1%, can't afford the rent. I'm competing against 90 other applicants for one property. So that's what the difference is. So then you can see straight away the hike from this time last year compared to this time last year, or March, sorry, 2020 to 2021, the increase is just huge. Terminations are happening. So where are we now? We're getting people calling us today that are highly distressed, expressing suicide intentions. Bailiffs are turning up, court matters, homeless, people are couch surfing, people are lodging, people are underreporting, you know, in terms of if they're not on the streets, they're living with family and friends. Our clients and staff, we used to be able to deliver advice in 20 minutes. Now we're finding we're having to book multiple appointments per client because we're having to de-escalate the situation. They're highly emotional. So then once we've calmed them down, we book them in for another appointment where we can actually give them the advice when they're in a more calm and comfortable state of mind. We're finding that we're having to book in more urgent and emergency appointments, and the request and draw on our internal non-legal support for emergency housing, food vouchers, furniture, and emergency household items and bedding has gone through the roof. Now, tenancy bonds is another hidden thing that you may not be aware of. It's always been an area of demand for advice about bonds. How do I get my bonds back? Why do I need to pay my bond? But what's been coupled and added pressure that's not being talked about is, yeah, I've got my rent increase, but now my bond increases. So I've got to find that extra money to add to my bond that they've already got. Got to top up that bond. And that's money people just don't have lying around. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the services we provide is a duty lawyer service. So again, it's pretty obvious. You can see that the demand for that duty lawyer service down at the courts has doubled. So what are the solutions? From our perspective, again, I'm coming from a lens, and I know a lot of my colleagues here will talk about the different services they offer and solutions that they can see for their clients. From our perspective, we just want to keep people in their homes. It's the best solution for everyone. The multiplier effects to provide ongoing sustained emergency relief funding and significant Residential Tenancy Act reform. And that's the key messages in that reform that we want government to escalate is around not just evicting people without just cause. So getting rid of the without grounds termination, to put in a minimum set of standards on what people should expect in a rental property. Look at some sort of rent control or rent setting so that there's an inbuilt limit on what people can increase their rent by proportionately. Security of tenure and those just key fundamental changes in making a more contemporary and responsive Residential Tenancy Act will really provide a lot of safety for people. Increasing the housing stock, and more importantly, what we're seeing from our clients is actually just repairing and maintaining your existing stock to a livable standard. And investment in provision of non-legal supports to enable people to stay in their home, wraparound support services, and of course, funding to sustain our service, because our funding finished in terms of response and additional staff to be able to respond to the additional pressure and demand on our services finished on 30 June. So it's putting triple the pressure on our service to try and meet that demand. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. And it's great to have that context about what you're seeing and hearing. I'd now like to introduce Suzanne Rooney, the CEO of St Vincent de Paul. Suzanne has held CEO, executive and senior management positions in the not-for-profit and government landscape ones that operate in a highly complex and challenging environment, including health, welfare, emergency services, disability services, in aged care. And in all of those roles, Suzanne has led transformational change. So Suzanne's going to talk to us about what Vinnie's is seeing and hearing. So please welcome Suzanne. Thank you.
Thanks. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I feel like saying what she said, you know, I mean, what you're going to hear from me is very similar. So just to give you some context, Vinnie's sees around 65,000 people a year throughout the state, and that's through our emergency services, which is probably the largest number of people that we actually see, and through financial counselling services, a whole range of different ways, and through homelessness services and our mental health services for people who are at risk of homelessness or have been homeless. So I think what we're seeing is, I guess I'll look at that in two aspects. It's the side of trying to keep people into their home, the increased risk of homelessness of people and people being evicted into homelessness. So we see in our emergency services is around 50,000 people that we see each year. We often see people a number of times. That depends on the complexity of the issues that we're actually dealing with people. And there is also a lot of those, not all of them, but a number of those people also link into our financial counselling services as well. What we're seeing is that significant number of people after the moratorium end having an increase in their rent to a level that they simply can't cover. So minimum around $50 a week to $100 a week. And we're also seeing a lot more people being evicted into homelessness because of the landlord who's selling their home. We have a lot of people who've invested, say, in a house, and then it's a buoyant market and now they're selling it and people are being evicted and they can't find anywhere else. They've got queues of 90 to 100 people. If you're on Centrelink, forget it. A lot of landlords are saying we're not even considering people who are on Centrelink. Single parent, it's much harder. Have pets, forget it too. So, you know, it's essentially that if you look, there's a complete lack of affordable rental housing, and the social housing wait time is really long. And I know some of the stats that Shelter WA have put out have shown also that waiting list is increasing. There's an increase in people with rental arrears, and certainly coming out of the moratorium, we saw a lot of people with rental arrears, and the quantum of that arrears has actually increased. So again, it's a multiplying effect. As rent goes up, the more you owe, there's, you know, so we're seeing that quantum and really difficult for people to overcome that. We're also seeing a lot more families in particular who are in really inappropriate accommodation. So in boarding houses, we saw about 1,700 families, people with children in boarding houses or kind of low budget hotels in the last year. We've seen around 400 families alone in cars where they'll call us and they'll meet us at a petrol station, or they'll meet wonderful volunteers somewhere that they can actually get some assistance with food or with petrol. So we're seeing people parking in places that are near schools so that they can still have their children go to school, and then providing support, but not being able to get people into housing from there because there isn't any. It's scarce as hen's teeth. The other thing that we're actually seeing is a lot more people moving back in with families. So adult children moving in with their parents who are on pensions into small units, sleeping on couches, sleeping on floors. We have examples of people where the children are inside and the parents, are sleeping in the car outside because there's no room in a small unit. We're seeing, particularly in the coal community, we're seeing larger numbers of people again moving into houses and lots of overcrowding, and then people will call us because they can't pay the bills, they can't pay the electricity bills, they need more food, so providing that sort of support. We have had And probably in the last few months, it's about a 16% now of our calls are for directly rental assistance. It's usually around 8%. And when you consider the numbers, because we were talking earlier about the tripling of calls, but in terms of our numbers around 50,000, that percentage has also doubled, but it's a significant number of people that we're seeing. And again, more people just needing, if they keep roof overhead, they cannot keep food on table. So that's the other side of that, is that whilst we might not see the rental going up, we will see more people needing more food for more often than we had before. So in our financial counselling services, Vinnie's runs the National Debt Helpline. So that's a telephone service, but also provides online services and chat services as well. And the calls to the helpline have steadily increased over the last 3 months, and all of our face-to-face services are seeing an increase in demand. And again, the calls are longer, more complex. People are so much more distressed. We're seeing people ringing up with, again, suicidal ideation. We've had examples with some of our financial counsellors. People are asking advice on how does their life insurance cover them? Like, if they kill themselves, will their family get the life insurance so that they can, have money to pay for rent or to stay in their home? Calls have increased a further 20% over the last few weeks. So in the last few weeks, we're just seeing a lot more calls coming through, and more people with couch surfing again, living with other people, just seeing no hope, seeing no way out, because they'll go to places to rent and there's queues of people, or the real estate agencies don't bother, or we had somebody pay 30% over the asking price for the rent. So it's a really, really competitive space. More and more people, more and more desperate people is what we're seeing. Particularly, as I've said, the people that we're seeing are people who are people on migrant visas, are actually skilled workers who have had casual work, or that their work has gone with COVID. So where they came over and then they've lost their visa, and then they can't get back home, and they can't get access to anything else here. We're seeing a lot more of those people. People on casual labour all over the place. Casual work means that you actually can't rent either, because you don't get ahead of the queue of the people who have more permanent work. We go into lockdown and you lose money. So we're seeing more and more of that as well. Women and children experiencing family and domestic violence. We're having people come and come to us, and we will provide some assistance during the day when there isn't somebody else, the person who is there, who is creating the family and domestic violence for them in the home, but they can't move out. There's nowhere to go. So we're trying to work with other agencies to try and keep that person and those children and families safe as possible, but it's absolutely an untenable situation. We're seeing people who are in those overcrowded positions, a particular situation in mind where person was living with friends, those friends are going down south, can't go down south, they're going to something smaller because they can't afford it. This mother and children are going back to a very unsafe situation because it's there or it's the streets. And that's pretty much the options that we're seeing from people now. Everything's compounded if you're on Centrelink, because there is nowhere for you to go. Again, you just keep falling down that bottom of the list. So then the other side of our services in terms of our ending homelessness services. It's not rocket science. You can't end homelessness if you haven't got a home. And so what we're seeing, and we work with a lot of other agencies, and what we're seeing is that, because there's nowhere for people to go, even when they have support from other agencies, when it is becoming increasingly more difficult to find a pathway for people out of home, getting out of homelessness. And I want to speak particularly what we see with young people through our Passages Youth Engagement Hubs. And we're seeing much more young people who are actually becoming into primary homelessness, so street homeless. but also because their payments are actually lower through Centrelink, because they have no record of renting or they've had some issues in the past, they're blacklisted for things. Young people fall again down the bottom of this. Young homeless people are at risk of homeless, and we're just seeing more and more distressed young people who aren't being able to find a solution. So I think the impact overall, and I think you're going to hear it a bit like a broken record from all of the services today, is that we are just seeing more and more distressed people. We're certainly helping people. We're certainly being able to keep some people in their home, being able to pay rental arrears, being able to work through our financial counsellors to work, restructure, deal with some of their debt being waived, being able to deal with some of the other situations. But when people are evicted and they are only able to go into low, affordable rental accommodation, or they're waiting for social housing, that's where there's a real problem. That's where they're going into hotels, or in budget hotels, or boarding houses, or sleeping with in the car, or moving in with family, or being on the streets. That's where we're seeing it's much more difficult for us to assist, because you can't help people if you can't find the homes. And in terms of solutions, I know we're going to talk about them later. They're all the things Sarah said. There's all of those things. We know what those solutions are. Again, it's things that some of you have been talking about, who've been in this area for decades, have been talking about. We knew this was coming. And so we really need to be, we need to fix it. We have these most amazing volunteers sometimes who've worked with us, some of them for 40 years. And they are saying to us, it is the worst they've ever seen it. They feel that they can't help people the way they need to. And I know that's a common issue for all of our services, where our staff are also being affected and our volunteers are being affected because they can't help people. People's lives are being affected. They're on hold, they're on crisis all the time. Children are being affected because, they're being affected by education or the stress in the house. And I know that's what we're doing today. I know that that's what we're doing, is looking at solutions, and there's been an enormous amount of knowledge and input into the solutions, but we just have to fix it. People are in the most distress they've ever been. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. I don't know whether to cry or to be outraged or angry. That was just such a heartfelt presentation that I feel a little bit speechless. And the work that you and your services do is phenomenal, as all of the services here in the room. And we know we can fix this, and that's what's outrageous. We can fix this problem. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Alison Evans from the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing. Alison has a deep commitment and substantive knowledge and experience working to end violence against women and children. We do know that family and domestic violence is one of the leading causes of homelessness. And I'd like to, if you could join welcoming Alison to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks. I too would just like to acknowledge I too would just like to acknowledge that we're meeting here today on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and to pay my respects to Aboriginal people, past, present and emerging. I know a few of you in this room, but just to let you, all of those of you who I don't know, I just have to say I love the eye contact and everything with the audience. I'm not going to be quite so good at that because I've just got a little bit of vision, so I'm going to be sort of keep having my paper up here. So please forgive me for that, but I don't want to miss out on any of the essential information. So I'm otherwise known as Calamity Jane. So, and I'm just going to check too that I've got this right. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so the most recent ABS personal safety survey revealed that over 50% of women who left a violent partner reported that they, and not their partner, moved out of the home that they shared. Many women who leave their homes following domestic and family violence struggle to find suitable accommodation. Over 90% of first requests by domestic and family violence clients to specialist homelessness services for long-term accommodation were unable to be met. The problems are compounded for women in regional and remote areas where there are very few safe and affordable housing options for women in those areas. Evidence suggests that in some cases, victim survivors who remain in their home experience housing vulnerability for years following separation from a violent partner. If their partner leaves the home, victim survivors can come under increased, financial stress, particularly women who are not able to find well-paid employment. Despite policy reforms that prioritise victim survivors remaining in their homes, many women are still forced to leave, and feedback from victim survivors using Safe at Home programs, that the evaluation of those programs indicated that when they left their homes, it was often because they could not afford rent or mortgage repayments on a single income. Women report that financial abuse escalated or occurred for the first time after separation. This included ex-partners refusing women access to finances or misusing money. For some women, this meant they experienced housing issues or periods of homelessness. In a study by Cortis and Mullins, one interviewee noted, New Start is so low. It actually is well below the poverty line. There are those real practical aspects of, am I better off to stay in this place where violence is part of it? Or do we make that significant and far-reaching change and then face the real prospect of homelessness and insecurity, insecure tenancy, and struggle with the basics? Women on no income often have little control over where they live, and refugees are having to pay most of the cost of their accommodation, including food, for nearly 2 years in a few of the cases with the refugees in WA. Housing issues, particularly homelessness, inadequate housing and overcrowding, disproportionately affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. In an ANRO's published report on the ways that First Nations women are working to prevent and respond to family violence, overcrowded and poorly maintained housing were highlighted as exacerbating violence and making women and children more vulnerable to abuse from a broad range of potential abusers. Inadequate housing is also a factor that can perpetuate abusive relationships. If women needed stable housing, particularly if they need housing to maintain custody, they are more likely to return to an abuser. For some young women at risk of experiencing homelessness, sex and intimate relationships are among the few resources at their disposal, and it's survival sex typically refers to the exchange of sex for necessities such as food, accommodation, and safety, and can be a feature of intimate relationships. Some young women engage in survival sex in order to secure material support and physical protection. Young women experiencing homelessness must also negotiate expectations that they are willing to exchange sex for those necessities. Women are more likely to return to their partner if they have difficulty maintaining independent accommodation. Around 1 in 5 women return to violent partners because they have no financial support or nowhere else to go. Several service providers report that some women who leave their home are forced to return to an arrangement of separated under one roof. It is reported that this practice has been increasing because of women's financial pressures due to rising housing costs. One service provider said, women are going back to partners because they can't achieve another housing outcome. And I mean, years ago, that wasn't the case. You could always get people housed. especially if children were involved, but there's just nothing and the pressure is massive. Another worker commented, while temporary accommodation is critical for women first leaving their violent partners, it isn't easy when you have young children and without the prospect of long-term housing options. We see too many women returning to violent partners rather than try and navigate the system. A common theme is a concern that the services that support women leaving violence are increasingly under-resourced. This has meant that support workers must prioritise those most urgent need of short-term assistance. Practitioners report that victim survivors need more consistent help to attain their preferred housing, whether this is to remain in their home, access private rentals, or apply for public housing. Stable housing is critical for women to build a safe life as it promotes both safety and well-being, including for children. While ideally, when situations of family and domestic violence arise, women will be able to stay in their homes and perpetrators would be removed. The reality is that many women need to leave their home to find safety. Women escaping family and domestic violence have 3 housing options: buying their own home, social housing, and private rental. Buying their own home is unrealistic for most women, leaving social housing and private rental the only viable options. The lack of social housing has been well documented, with an underinvestment in social housing over the past 2 decades. The private rental market often does not provide affordable options for women escaping family and domestic violence. Many women with children are relying on social security support, which even with additional allowances is not adequate to afford family accommodation in the current market. Even where housing is available, women with children that have experienced domestic violence can face discrimination from landlords that preference childless couples with stable income in tight, as we know, very tight rental markets at the moment. Access can be further complicated where women have poor rental or credit records due to the behaviour of their abusive ex-partners. I'd actually like to close with the voices of women experiencing housing insecurity and domestic and family violence, and also a family violence worker who's all been caught up in the current housing crisis in WA. So Janelle, my name is Janelle and I'm 28 years old with 2 children. We are currently residing with my husband who is abusive, even though we lived within a refuge for over 6 months last year. Things got bad during the first COVID lockdown and we stayed within a refuge for a total of 4 months. But I could not find any housing in my own right and had to return to the family home with my husband. The abuse escalated during this time and we returned to the same refuge accommodation again for 2 months. Yet once again, I could not access any form of housing where myself and the children could be independent and safe. Luckily, the refuge staff continued to visit and support us through their outreach program. I was honest with them that things weren't good and the abuse was ongoing. They encouraged me to access refuge accommodation again. Yet the reality has not changed. I still would not be able to access independent accommodation after accessing the refuge for a 3rd time. So Mariam. My name is Mariam and I'm 33 years old with 2 children aged 6 and 4. I stayed at a refuge twice during 2020 and 2021 and received positive support from the women who work there. But I had to return to my husband both times due to there being no options for housing for me and risks to my residency through immigration if I'm not living with my husband. I only receive special benefit through Centrelink for my children, so cannot possibly afford private rental. Therefore, finding independent housing away from the abuse for myself and children is impossible. At times, the abuse has increased and I've contacted the refuge for support. This really makes me sad as I learned so much about independence and my rights while staying in the refuge, and I want to start a new life for myself and for my children. Sue. My name is Sue. I'm a dedicated support worker within a refuge. The latest issue we have been facing as a service is that women face roadblocks when trying to access all housing pathways. Both the community and government housing waitlists are extremely long, and I would argue almost unattainable. Women are constantly submitting applications for rental properties, which are priced too high and have at times up to 50 or so applicants interested. There are no transitional properties available, which were good options for these clients in the past. These transitional properties are accommodated as previous refuge clients are also unable to move on. Other options that were drawn on in the past, such as caravan parks, are fully booked from WA tourists, and these types of accommodation often discriminate against our clients. It is very sad to watch vulnerable women continue to be rejected and the impacts this has on their self-esteem and their well-being. What I am witnessing is women who feel absolute despair, as refuge accommodation is not designed to be a long-term solution or stay. Since COVID-19, there are almost insurmountable barriers to positive outcomes for women and their children, which our sector works very hard towards. Women feel they have no other option but to live with the perpetrator and put their lives at risk. We have also had women return to their partner, and when the violence has escalated, they've reached back out for assistance. Staff are also feeling the impact as they work in conflict with their core values when they have to advise women searching for support that there are no vacancies. We are extremely concerned that high-risk cases are not being responded to because of the lack of vacancies, and that these women are currently not evident in the data. I really hope to see some significant change soon. And I'd like to end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. And that's just another powerful example of why we need to fix this current housing shortage. So in terms of the proceedings for the rest of the day, I'm just going to quickly walk you through our solutions that we've developed with our Unlock Housing partners and members on how we can fix this housing shortage. And then we'll have a short break, and then we'll invite some panellists who are actually doing the work on the ground now to address the housing issues. So they will show what is possible if we put our fine minds together and come and work on solutions. So I'm a bit of a Luddite, so let's see how this goes. Thank you. So Shelter's vision is that all people in WA have housing that enables them to thrive. That's our DNA. That's why we're here today. I mentioned earlier that last week the WA government released their draft infrastructure strategy. They get it. Housing's critical economic and social infrastructure. Now, people have talked about the current shortage, 17,000 households, about 34,000 people on the wait list for social housing. Pretty long queue if you're in housing stress. 2,769 people on the priority wait list. It has not been this bad since 2014. We're going backwards. Lowest vacancy rate in 40 years, average 20% increase in rents, and we've heard from Suzanne and Alison the consequences. You would have seen the West this week. 56 people died on the streets. We can do better than that, surely. And behind every statistic, there's an individual. We had hoped to hear Brad's story today. The voice of lived experience is really critical. Unfortunately, Brad couldn't be here. He's in rental stress. His life is difficult, and he was unable to attend. But Alison, thank you for sharing those women's stories. That was very important. So the strategy we've put together, it's a collaborative co-investment strategy, leveraging partnerships with government, industry, the private sector, and of course our fantastic community sector. I mentioned the government is doing some great work. We need to build on that work and accelerate the rate and increase the level of investment. Our solution is pragmatic. It speaks to the current shortage and over-construction boom that we've got at the moment and create pipelines of work. So when this current shortage comes down, the investment we've made in apprentices in the construction industry can be leveraged. And the community housing sector, the unsung heroes, are a key delivery partner. So I do want to acknowledge what the state has done. There has been some really great investment into homelessness services, and there has been a commitment to new investment into social housing. But in terms of the context, we have lost 1,155 social homes since 2016. It is fantastic that we're going to get 870 social homes, but current investment will not deliver what we've lost. We've got a predicted $5 billion surplus. Who'd like that to be spent on housing? Great. So we are urging the government to use the surplus to end the housing shortage. Okay, we did some independent polling in June 2021. The community gets it. Painted Dog did this research for us, and the community understands the importance of a home and support for increased investment into social housing and affordable housing and homelessness services. They get it. You need a home. COVID-19 showed us we need a home to keep everybody safe and well. It's a social vaccine. Let's use the budget to address the shortage. And I was speaking with somebody this morning with Sarah, who came from Hay Street here, and said the level of street present homelessness is just really confronting at the moment. So our package is pretty simple. We just need to co-invest in social and affordable housing, fix the housing system and end homelessness. Then we can all pack up and go home. We know that housing creates jobs, and we know that that's a core issue for government. So, you know, this package aligns with that jobs and economic wealth creation. We know it will reduce housing stress. We know that investment in housing will save funding from other parts of the government budget, like the health budget, the mental health budget. So we think it makes sense. So in terms of the investment in social and affordable housing, we need to build on those 860 homes and build more houses. We need to facilitate affordable rental homes, and we'll hear from Chris Smith, the CEO of Foundation Housing, on some great work they're doing there. We need to look at energy efficiency. Climate change is real, so how can our houses respond to that? We released a report this week. There's lots of vacant government land. How can we use that land and use fantastic prefabricated construction techniques? We'll hear about that later today to rapidly increase supply while we plan for pipelines of work. And in 2017, the City of Perth did an audit of all of the vacant commercial space. There's opportunities there. So we'll hear from one of our speakers on what we could do with vacant commercial spaces to increase supply. Who's here from the community housing sector? Gold. Look at the gold in the room. I'd encourage you all to read the draft WA infrastructure strategy, which outlines the benefits of using the community housing sector as a delivery partner. They make a considerable contribution. They own about 20% of the stock at the moment. It's a real missed opportunity because they can attract diverse funding as well as offering great tenant outcomes. They deliver housing more efficiently, great tenant outcomes. They're independently regulated if they're registered. They offer boutique products and products at scale, and they can bring new money into our social housing system through Commonwealth rent assistance. We'll hear from Chris about access to NIFIC, the National Housing Finance Investment Corporation, GST exemptions. All of this fabulous value that community housing brings to our state has not been realised. And we think, like other states, we just need to really grow that sector to drive more investment into social and affordable homes. Fix the housing system. So Sarah talked about the Residential Tenancy Act. None of this requires money. It just requires fine brains to look at what are the policy blockers to having an effective housing market, reform the Residential Tenancy Act, get rid of the red tape that's stopping the community housing sector from growing. So there's a whole range of policy asks as part of our package. And of course, end homelessness. And we've got some people here from the WA Alliance To End Homelessness who led the charge in terms of we can end homelessness in WA. We need to, right now, make sure no one is rough sleeping. So more investment into interim accommodation solutions, build on the fantastic work of the McGowan government in their first term and increase investment into housing first, but making sure there are workers that can go out and work with people and link people to housing. We need to focus on the needs of young people. Suzanne outlined some of the pressures that are specifically facing young people experiencing homelessness. We need to have them ready for a bright future by providing homes and support. We need to think about, the justice issues facing people experiencing homelessness and make sure that there's enough support there. And the voices of people with lived experience are really important. There's a real thirst and appetite from people to contribute to the housing solution. So how can we build that into our housing system and our service system? So our strategy is pragmatic, it's doable, it's achievable, it's working in partnership, it's building on current initiatives, it's looking to the current pressures, but looking to the future. And we are, as I said, just urging the government to use the surplus to solve the housing shortage. So there's further information on the Unlock Housing website. I'd like to thank our Unlock Housing partners and all the shelter members who are making this work possible. And now invite you to have a short 10-minute break. And then we'll come back and hear the solutions that are in action. So big round of applause to you all. Zoom people, you have permission to go and get a cup of tea, and we'll see you all back in 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you. And as you're coming back to your seats, I'm doing a swift handover to the Chair of Shelter WA, who will be moderating this section of solutions. So I'd like to introduce Kieran Wong. For those who haven't met Kieran, he's the fabulous Chair of Shelter WA. And also a bit remiss, I didn't acknowledge the other board members who are in the room. I'm blessed to have such a skilled and supportive board here. So Shelter board members, can you put your hands up? And not look at me like that. Thank you, Natalie Sangali. So we've got some board members here and online. So Kieran Wong. Kieran is an architect and his portfolio of projects includes urban design, educational and public buildings that have been awarded by the Australian Institute of Architects across commercial, public, urban design, interiors, education and residential categories, as well as winning the Australian Award for Urban Design and an International Award for Public Participation for their work in a community-led design process. Kieran's writing has been published widely on topics covering urban renewal, Indigenous housing, and new models of practice and procurement. Kieran's work is underpinned by his belief that design matters and the ability of good design to influence positive outcomes, not just for individuals, but for the wider community. So Kieran is a principal with the Fulcrum Agency, and as I said, Chair of Shelter WA, and he'll be moderating this afternoon session. So please join with me in welcoming Kieran to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me okay on the microphone? Good afternoon, and thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to be here today. And I think we can thank the speakers from the first session for providing such incredible stories and insight into the situation at hand, how it stands today. But I'm very excited about this next part of this session, which is really focusing on solutions or responses or, in a sense, opportunities that are being seen to respond to this. So I'm going to invite a series of people up to talk on the panel. What I might do is, as I introduce you and read your bio, if you can just come on to stage, if that's okay. So we've got some fantastic panelists today. I'll start with Michelle Blakely. Michelle Blakely is an award-winning architect offering full design project management services for small to medium buildings across all sectors. And of particular interest to design opportunities for residential projects for people over 55, which really isn't that old, let's face it. Having just had my birthday on Monday, I think that's, anyway. She believes that there is a need for fresh thinking and exploration of housing types beyond traditional ideas of the family home. And you may also be aware of her prefabricated project, My Home, as well, which is a fantastic project. So Michelle, I did see her. Oh, there she is. Great. If you could come up onto stage. That's who I have. Yeah, first. That's you. So Michelle Blakely.
Hi. Now, just go down a bit shorter. I'm basically here to tell you about My Home, and essentially My Home is a solution to provide housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. And it's as simple as that. And it came about because we were basically tired of waiting for the government to do something about providing that housing. It hasn't happened yet, and it seems like it isn't going to happen in the foreseeable future in any impactful way. So My Home is based on three premises. The first is that land is a major cost of providing housing. So if you take away the cost of the land, suddenly affordable housing is achievable. The second premise is basically working to a housing first approach, which I think most of you are probably all aware of. We need to provide a permanent, safe, secure home with wraparound support services. It's not enough just to provide a roof over your head. It needs the wraparound support services which cater specifically for the individual, if we have a chance of enabling them and helping them to live a more independent and successful life. The third premise is that everyone deserves a house that is designed and built to a high standard of performance, energy efficiency, comfort and enjoyment. And people experiencing homelessness are no exception. So, how does My Home do this? We work to a PPP model, a public-private partnership model, which the government and the private sector, particularly developers, are very familiar with. Public is the government or the church providing land, vacant land, on long-term peppercorn leases. The private sector, top-end corporates, either through tax-deductible contributions or through impact investment, provide the funds for the construction of the houses. And then lastly, community housing provider comes along and manages the property and the tenants, and also does the selection of the tenants, and most importantly, acts as the conduit to the services that those tenants need. So, to make this happen, we're using a prefabricated timber wall, ceiling and floor system. And we've chosen this particular prefabricated system because it can help us deliver on performance. It is incredibly well insulated, allows us the versatility of design, and gives us the opportunity to really create a very attractive, enjoyable space. We want these houses to be places that people enjoy coming home to. And that's fundamental to a home. It's something you enjoy. So we've actually built a demonstration house out at the prefabricated site in Kewdale, and we arrived at that demonstration house by gathering together a group of builders who were interested in prefabricated structures. Obviously the architect, the project manager, the structural engineer, the prefabricator, and some of the suppliers that we'd be working with. And we had think tanks, and we put some designs in front of them for these 30 square metre, very modest, small, single resident houses, and said, okay, this is what we would like to deliver. How can you make us do this in the most cost-efficient way possible, in the quickest way possible? And so we refined and refined and refined until we had something which we felt ticked all the boxes. And this is what we ended up with. So we have this prefabricated home that is solar energy, which means that we virtually will have no power costs, which is quite significant when you think that that individual living in that house will not have to pay a power bill. Very, very special. We use passive solar principles, such as always having the houses facing in a northerly direction so that the veranda and the living rooms are facing into the winter sun, and on and on and on it goes. So a major focus of our houses is that they are delivering at a very high standard. And the good news is that our first site in North Fremantle, which is 18 houses, is fully funded. The land from the government has been, the land lease, the signing of the land lease has been confirmed and will be announced to the public the first week in August. And that means that we'll be able to start construction on the first houses by the end of August. Because of the nature of the prefabrication, each of these houses, if you imagine a flat pack IKEA, is delivered to site. Each house can be erected in 3 hours, and then the builder comes along and does the fit out for, you know, plasterboard painting, plumbing, electrical, etc. So those houses, 18 houses, we're working towards having them finished by Christmas. Whether that happens is another thing. Everybody wants things finished by Christmas, but definitely those residents will be in those houses early in the new year. So if we can get houses on the ground and occupied within 6 months, it's a hell of a long way from waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 years for a project from start to finish. And that's currently what you're looking at for most social housing projects. So we're really excited. We have another site ready to go, which has just received planning approval in Berwick Street. We have a site in Dianella, which is a Catholic church site, and another one in Geraldton. We're talking to other church groups. And the government has basically said to us, get the first one up and running, demonstrate proof of concept, and we will keep feeding you land. What that means is that the government acknowledges that it's a viable solution to provide land for people to build houses for homeless people and for social housing. So it's actionable, it's happening, and the government supports it. So we don't really need to say any more, do we, Michelle? Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Look, I think it's a fantastic project, and look forward to maybe taking some questions about the project in the panel discussion. But now I'd like to introduce Dominic Letts, Chief Operating Officer at Fleetwood Building Solutions, who are Australia's leading prefabricated and modular housing company, and they're headquartered here in WA. Dominic joined Fleetwood in 2008 and has been promoted through operational and general management roles to his current position as COO. Fleetwood Building Solution leads the market in modular construction, and they work with government departments, owners, architects and engineers to design and build custom modular buildings, predominantly for the affordable housing sector, education, correction and mining industries. So please welcome Dominic Letts.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. So I'm here to speak about modular building and the benefits that it can provide in supporting the current housing shortages we're feeling here in Western Australia. So firstly, a little bit about Fleetwood. We are a building company. We're national. We've got operations on both the east and the west coast. We've got about 400 employees and about double that with regular contractors. And as Kieran said, we were founded right here in Western Australia about 55 years ago. And this is where our headquarters remains today. But most importantly, we build a little bit differently to most. We're modular builders. If I can drive this. And what modular building looks like is a little bit like this. No, not like that. Can we get the video going? No video. Really was a fantastic video. So I'll have to show you another time. But essentially, what modular building is building off-site in a factory. So the way we build is we build everything around a module. And if you think of a module like a Lego brick, and for us, the Lego brick is the size of the back of a truck, we build modules to an as-complete stage in our factory. Once completed, we put them on the back of a truck. We take them to the site, which has already been pre-prepared. We assemble the modules together, connect to the services, power, water, sewer, communications, and fundamentally, the home is ready to occupy. And one of the key benefits of modular building is speed. And McKinsey, in one of their reports, identified that modular building can yield between 20 and 50% speed efficiencies compared to traditional building methodology. There's two ways that speed is achieved. The first is, as I've just explained, the site is prepared concurrently with the house being built off-site in a factory. And the other way the speed is generated is through the efficient process of factory techniques. And those processes yield speed of construction of the modules. The other thing I want to explain to you is capacity. So here in Perth, Fleetwood has its largest factory. It's located out near the airport in High Wycombe. It's about 80,000 square metres, 8 hectares. I'm told it's about the size of 4 Optus stadiums. That capacity allows us to produce in current operations in the order of 30 homes per month. And they're 30 homes with a concrete base. In addition to that, you see the large shed in the middle there. We have 2 undercover production lines. And if we're building with steel chassis, we can produce in the order of 22 module units per month as well. So it's for these fundamental reasons, speed and capacity, that we think modular building can play a part in supporting the solutions to the current housing shortages that we're feeling here in Western Australia. And importantly, I want to emphasise that modular building is a process, an efficient process that yields an outcome. And the outcomes are homes. And the homes are as good a quality or better quality than those used or those produced by conventional building methodology. And you can see examples of our built form, our homes, on the screen in front of you. And I wanted to show an even better video right now. But what this video does is exemplify how modular building has supported housing shortages here in Western Australia already. In 2014, in the town of Port Hedland, there was a real crunch on accommodation or housing for key workers. And to address that, the government, together with Fleetwood, built Osprey Village. Osprey Village is a 300-home housing estate built specifically to provide quality and affordable rentals for key workers. That village is filled with small business workers, with teachers, with childcare workers, and with many representatives of not-for-profits, some of those which are represented here today. So Fleetwood and the Department of Communities built Osprey Village in about a year. And I'm pleased to say that Osprey Village is performing its purpose. It's full today. It's got a wait list of 60. And you can only imagine the condition or the situation in the town of Port Hedland if Osprey Village wasn't there today. So in conclusion, I want to just present to you modular building. We think that it can play a role in supporting addressing housing shortages here in WA for the 2 key reasons of speed of execution, speed to market of our product, and also through the capacity that modular buildings can deliver into the market. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Dominic. And we will make sure that the links to those videos are sent to everyone today. So apologies for that. I also was remiss in not thanking Fleetwood for their sponsorship of the Homelessness Week next week. And, you know, at Shelter, we are we're always delighted to partner with industry, and we're always delighted to partner with industry players that are focused on the issues at hand in Western Australia. I'd like to introduce Lee Rosetto now, who's a partner at Minter Ellison. It's got in brackets here, law firm. I think we all know that. So, but in case you didn't, they're a law firm. Lee acts for government, university and private clients and draws on significant experience to advise on the full spectrum of property, infrastructure and resource projects. and he has particular market expertise in complex, large-scale urban renewal, land and housing development, infrastructure projects, public-private partnerships, PPPs, which we've heard about already today, affordable housing, contaminated sites, as well as land tenure, statutory interpretation, policy and strategic advice. Jeepers, that's a lot of things that you do. But more recently, and I think what we're going to hear today, Lee's been involved in exciting projects repurposing empty commercial spaces for much needed housing. Please welcome Lee Rossetto.
Thank you very much for having me. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. You've heard about my life as a lawyer, my day job, and in that capacity I worked with many of you. I can see many familiar faces in the room on a number of affordable and social housing projects in WA over the years. But today I'm here in my capacity as the WA Chair of Housing All Australians and to talk to you about what we're doing here and around the country. So, what is Housing All Australians? It was founded by Robert Pradlin, a friend and a former client of mine who had a long career in property development at one of the largest residential property developers in Australia. Housing All Australians is a for-purpose organisation which facilitates a private sector voice and repositions the discussion and action on social and affordable housing for those on low and very low incomes. Housing All Australians is a group of private sector individuals and corporates with a shared vision that it's in Australia's long-term economic interest to house all Australians. Our mission, our single mission, is to harness the ability of the private sector and collaborate to address the chronic shortage of low-income housing. We harness the goodwill that exists within the private sector to develop strategies, take actions, and raise awareness in respect to the fundamental human need for shelter. We also provide a forum for the sharing of facts and ideas, experience, and private sector skills around the creation of affordable housing options. And in particular, I'd emphasise that we're focused on solutions that don't rely on government financial subsidy. So what are our priorities? We have some short-term, medium-term and long-term goals covering the housing continuum and all aimed at solving aspects of the shortage of affordable and social housing here in Australia. The first of our initiatives is generally known as pop-up shelters, but that can be a little misleading, and I'll give you a bit more information. Really what we're talking about here is repurposed vacant buildings which are used to provide transitional accommodation for the homeless. And I'll provide you with some specific examples later on. This initiative is an immediate response to by the private sector to address homelessness. And at this time, Housing All Australians is prioritising its support to the fastest growing cohort of homeless or at risk of homelessness, being women aged over 55. There are thousands of suitable unused buildings across Australia which can be used as transitional shelter without cost to the owner. Our focus is on existing residential dwellings, aged care and retirement facilities, as they are already configured to meet the accommodation needs and usually don't present the same challenges when it comes to planning and building regulation that you'll come up against with commercial and office buildings. And whilst there is a skill shortage and long delays to deliver traditional housing, our model in identifying properties which are already in existence but unused means that projects can get off the ground quickly, avoiding delays as they require much less work to make them fit for purpose. The pop-up shelter or meanwhile housing concept, and I'll explain that term, was formed to provide an immediate short-term solution while more long-term options can be explored and implemented, including transitioning into social housing where appropriate. So within this concept, we have what I'm terming the meanwhile housing. So this is where a large house or a hostel or aged care facility will be repurposed and operated as a shelter for a short time, so between 12 months and 5 years, while the building owner awaits for redevelopment approvals for another purpose. We also use this model for longer term or more permanent housing, where we partner with organisations that own properties who intend to use the properties for that use for the foreseeable future, usually not for profits or churches. And we're partnering with a number of those to deliver these pop-up shelters within properties that they own and will manage. Now, in order for a pop-up shelter to be created, it must be established that there's an unmet need for a particular cohort in a particular area. We don't want to be doubling up with government's efforts and the efforts of others. Secondly, we need to ensure that there's a service provider willing to support the users of the shelter. We're not a service provider, we just provide turnkey solutions and hand over the fit for purpose accommodation at practical completion. Thirdly, we need to ensure that it's economically viable and that there are no legal or practical impediments to do what it is we want to do. So we will do our due diligence first, and our investment decisions are made according to the tenure. You can imagine it's a little more difficult to justify significant investment when you only have the use of the facility for 1-2 years. A lot easier to justify more significant investment if we have a 10 or 20-year lease or other commitment. I'll give you some examples of some of the projects that we have successfully delivered and that we're looking to deliver here in WA towards the end. But for now, I'd also like to talk about the economic study. We've all heard a lot about the serious social impacts of the shortage of appropriate housing. We're focusing on a national economic study, which aims to deliver a cost-benefit ratio that brings to life the scale of future costs to Australia of not providing sufficient social and affordable housing. We hope to have the results towards the end of this year or early next year. And the outcome of that research and other economic studies will be used to actively engage the private sector, government and other key stakeholders as part of a national education campaign on the long-term economic costs to drive change and encourage investment into affordable housing. The third of our strategic priorities is generally grouped together as affordable housing and affordable rental housing in particular. So we're working across the property sector on a number of models aimed at unlocking the use of government and church-owned land, and Michelle's example is a great one, and we're pleased to be supporting My Homes. And also using policy levers within the planning system to create value for developers. In each case, to facilitate the delivery of affordable housing and affordable rentals within private developments. And I emphasise this is not where this is mandated, this is voluntary. So for example, build to rent as an asset class and investment class is very mature in the United States and relatively new and emerging here in Australia. Indeed, our Australian super funds invest in this asset class in the USA, but not here in Australia. And that goes to our economic study, which we hope to change that discussion. So build to rent, for those who don't know, refers to a residential development in which all apartments are owned by a developer and leased out to tenants. So there may be opportunities in our view to test the viability of build to rent with an affordable rental component on government or church-owned land. However, it's likely that land tax reform at the very least is required here in WA to unlock the potential that has been undertaken in New South Wales and Victoria, where they're a little ahead of us on build to rent. We're also looking at a permanent rental affordability solution, which is a model whereby as part of a negotiation process with local government, the developer agrees to share some of the value created by planning concessions, where it's plot ratio or the like, to create a private affordable housing for life. And this obligation is then secured by registering a suitable, probably the only instrument available to us at the moment is a restrictive covenant on the title. In other jurisdictions, we have voluntary planning agreements and the like. The developer is then able to sell the dwellings to investors in the private market at a lower price due to the affordable housing encumbrance, with an obligation on the investor to comply with a robust governance process. As part of this, and we're looking at governance processes that don't require government, we're all familiar with the NRAS governance arrangements. We're seeking to replicate that in a simple and achievable way without heavy or ideally any government regulation, with the use of an approved property manager to manage the rental of these dwellings. It's a little easier to manage the sales because they occur less frequently. So again, I would emphasise these models are voluntary for developers, and it relies upon the value creation either through peppercorn leases on church or government-owned land, or on planning concessions or uplifts, so that the provision of affordable housing, affordable outcomes is essentially cost neutral to the developer. I'd like to talk to you about a couple of our examples of the pop-up shelters. Robert Pradlin and his team in Melbourne are a couple of years ahead of where we are here in WA, but I recommend you to go to the Housing All Australians website. There's a brilliant 5-minute video in which a number of the residents of the Lake House shelter in Melbourne are being interviewed, and it's quite compelling to hear how the opportunity to occupy this accommodation made such a difference to their lives. So Lake House, a 32-room facility in Melbourne, in the Melbourne CBD, was the first of Housing All Australians pop-up shelters. The target cohort was women aged over 55 who were experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. It was a vacant aged care facility owned by Casper Care in South Melbourne, and was initially used to provide short-term crisis accommodation for up to 30 women at a time while the building awaited redevelopment approval. The private sector and local government donated professional services and goods for setup, site preparation, building works, garden, fit out and furnishing, approximately $300,000 in value. And then YWCA, the Young Women's Association Housing, became the lessee and the tenancy provider and supported those being housed, connecting them to additional community services. The initial lease was for 12 months, that was extended to 18 months, and YWCA are about to sign a further lease for 5 years. So what that means is this facility would have been vacant, unused for 7 years, if not used as a transitional shelter and refurbished by the private sector. And as you can see from the diagram on this slide, so far, in the first 2 years, 85 women have been housed. The average length of stay was 9 months. 38% of women housed secured public or community housing, and 9% secured private rentals. And 24 reconnected and moved back in with family, friends or partners. Under the lease, YWC was charged $1 a year for the use of the property, and building outgoings were covered by a below market rent paid by the women as subtenants. And so we assisted as a project facilitator, working on the project planning, sourcing pro bono services from the private sector, stakeholder management and coordination of contributors, and assisting with communication and coordinating volunteers. And this is a meanwhile use. This is what I mean when I talk about a meanwhile use. It's a meanwhile use while the property awaits redevelopment approval. The lease contains a detailed strategy for the closure of the pop-up shelter, and all those housed are to be transitioned by YWCA into public or community housing, private rental, or supported return to family and friends. And the furniture and chattels used will be repurposed into another project. Another project that's just been completed in Melbourne is the Garden House. Before and after, So this was a large empty heritage building used as offices for many years, and it was empty for 7 years. We arranged for a 5-year lease at $1 a year to the YWCA and arranged refurbishment using the goodwill in the private sector. Again, over 30 organisations contributed and provided over $200,000 of pro bono product and services. And that's shortly to be opened. A little closer to home, I'm very pleased that we're working on our first project here in WA. Our project partner are Uniting WA, and I'm pleased Troy Morse is here with us today in the audience. Uniting owns a property in Fremantle and will be the service provider, providing support to the women who it's intended will be housed in the property. The plan is to redevelop the property to house approximately 14 women aged over 55 who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. This will be a longer term commitment, not a meanwhile commitment, but the property is owned by Uniting. And I'm pleased to say we have an exceptional team of architects, town planners, surveyors, heritage architects and lawyers. And we're all in the process of obtaining the relevant approvals for the development and also support from construction partners to assist with its redevelopment. All parties are contributing their services and expertise on a pro bono basis. And we're looking to secure construction services at cost and, if possible, with materials to be donated. And we have commitments from other Housing All Australian partners to fit out the premises at no cost. And this means we can help Uniting WA deliver the project at a fraction of the cost they might otherwise have been able to do. So I'll leave you with that thought and look forward to the panel discussion later. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Another fantastic solution and approach to the challenges we've been talking about today. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker for today, Chris Smith, who's the CEO of Foundation Housing. Chris joined Foundation Housing, I guess you could say, in a sense, as community housing providers, you know, the original initiators or innovators of build to rent supply into the market. But Chris joined Foundation Housing in September 2014 from a statutory investment fund where he held various senior and executive roles in portfolio management and general management. He has a long-standing interest in working for better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and those more broadly within the community. Chris recognises the significance of Foundation Housing's role in managing housing infrastructure and works to make a positive impact in communities across Western Australia. So please welcome Chris Smith.
Thank you. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, of land upon which we meet today, pay respects to elders past and present and emerging, and also to the over 300 tenants and residents that we house across this vast state who are very valuable and important to us in what we do in housing those who are most vulnerable. Firstly, Michelle and the team, thank you. Congratulations on another great event. It's wonderful to be here today. Community housing providers or organisations such as Foundation Housing, we're a tier 1 provider. There's about 35 of us across the country. And as Michelle said in the when she made her presentation, we're a highly regulated sector. To maintain those tier 1 registrations, we have to comply with a certain number of regulatory processes, which means that we are we're a safe pair of hands in managing state government assets. Our organisation, I consider us as a developer, an investor, we're a property and asset manager, we're a support worker, and we're a capital aggregator. We rely on all of those components to deliver our services. Our purpose is to deliver and manage social and affordable housing portfolios to support those most in need with safe and secure and affordable housing that enables our customers to lead fulfilled lives. Our tenants and residents in our organisation are our beacon on the hill. All the decisions we take in relation to our projects, our investments, what we seek to leverage is all about the people that we house. Our sector, when enabled, has the demonstrated capacity to leverage new and affordable housing. And that can be generated through either asset management transfers or the creation of NIFIC, which has seen us as an organisation, leverage $80 million in new housing. As Michelle mentioned, the public housing system over the last 5 years has seen a regression of over 1,000 properties. And during that same period, Foundation Housing has delivered 240 new properties, 240 new housing infrastructure properties that are in the system for perpetuity, where we really value the importance of in perpetuity and long-term housing. And I think that's one of the gaps that's been raised in so many presentations today, that housing is an infrastructure, and it was great to see Infrastructure WA identify that there's been a deficit in the system. It takes courage from a government to make a long-term investment strategy, but it's a really important part of what we work to achieve, that under a federated model, the delivery of public housing is a state's responsibility, and they need to recognise that and investing that not just for the next term or the term thereafter, but have a strategy that invests in delivering the required capital to make sure that housing is sustained longer term. If we take the current wait list and take the priority wait list, to meet that demand, there's about $1.5 billion required to deliver 3,500 new properties. And when we talk about that, I think the budget has the capacity to deliver that over the next 10 years and beyond. Foundation Housing, or just who we are, we have 2,000 properties across the country. We have 1,500 public or social housings. We have 120 what we call affordable houses, which I'll talk to shortly. We have 400 lodging rooms, and we provide fee-for-service work for around about another 300 properties, and that's supporting Indigenous organisations, not-for-profit, with the management of their portfolios. We want to work and reactivate and activate with the government, and they're a really important partner of ours. But in saying that, there hasn't been a lot of activity coming forward in relation to new initiatives that we've been able to leverage. This year, we released our Elevate project, which is an affordable housing portfolio, which we leveraged $45 million through the National Housing Finance Investment Corporation. Last year, we recognised that there was an opportunity in the market where developers had constrained stock, which they needed to dispose of. So we approached a number of developers who had larger portfolios. We approached them about a wholesale transaction where we come into those relevant projects and seek to acquire anything from 2 to 20 units at a discount. Leveraging our not-for-profit status, our charitable status, we're able to achieve a number of exemptions through those transactions, which effectively saw the organisation secure $40 million worth of assets, but realise $55 million worth of value through the valuation process. More importantly, though, we housed over 150 people in affordable housing. The product came to market in January this year. We received over 3,500 expressions of interest in the space of 3 weeks. We had 100 units to take to market. Of those 3,500, 3,000 were eligible for the project, with another 500 who interestingly sat between that social housing window and the affordable level. So they were actually 500 people who are being left out of the system entirely, and I suspect they're some of the people that have been having that housing stress that we've been hearing about today. Our case study there, Jake had applied for a number of properties. He's a fireman. He was living with one of his mates. He was having no luck finding any properties, made the application, and fortunately he was successful in getting one of our Subiaco properties. And it's important to note that through this project, we were very, very disciplined in terms of where we would and wouldn't buy. The quality of product was essential. The builder had to have been a reputable builder, and it had to have been a reputable developer. And the price point had to meet a certain price point. So we had a number of key criteria on how to move forward through that. Another key part of the project, it didn't receive any government funding. We didn't ask the state for any contribution. We funded it fully through NIFIC. And I'm pleased to say that this morning I was on a call with them and some others about re-establishing another fund to do another project such as this. And we've got a workshop tomorrow with another investor representing a super fund who is also keen to support another affordable housing project. So we hope that over the next next 12 months, we can take another 200 or 300 properties to market. To achieve that though, I note that that's not addressing social housing. It's not addressing more public housing and the infrastructure that's required to do that. We are passionate about that. We're only doing affordable housing because there is no strategy for social or public housing. And we would love to be delivering 300 long-term affordable, long-term social housing units to the market. That is what we want to do. That is what we're committed to. But in the interim, it's important that we maintain housing supply and the affordable market. It's been fascinating working through the case, each stories that each person has told us. And we had a nurse that's living in one of our Verdant properties, and she said it's the first time since she's left home that she's felt safe, that she drives into the car park, she parks the car, she gets in the lift, she goes to level 17. She has to have a fob to get into her apartment, to get to her level. Once she closes that door, there's only one point of entry in, and she feels extremely safe. And she sleeps at night. And this is a nurse who had been sharing houses and living in short-term rentals and facing that cycle of in and out every 12 months. And our project at the end of year 20, when our debt expires, we expect to be able to retain 70% of that portfolio unencumbered, and we'll refinance the balance or sell part of that off after year 20. So we've demonstrated the model works. It's a really innovative project. It's the first of its kind that's being commissioned by a community housing provider. It's a quasi build to rent, but we're scattering our portfolio across different locations. The Elevate portfolio runs from Joondalup, which is that art house project you can see on screen there now, all the way down to Atwell, where we've acquired 3-bedroom units that are being utilised by effectively service workers that are working for many of the agencies that are in this room today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'd like to invite the 4 speakers to come onto stage now and take a seat. There's some comfy chairs here for you all. And we will be now taking questions from the floor and also via Zoom. How am I seeing the Zoom questions? Great, okay. There's a microphone here for the panelists. Panelists, up you come. If you have a question in the audience or would like to ask or find out a bit more information, this is your chance to do so. And if you're on the Zoom and would like to type a question into the question box, Heather will let me know as well. Has anyone got a question from the audience? So we're straight into it. Great. We've got a roving mic. Thank you. And if you could identify if it's to a particular panelist, we can make sure they get the mic. Thanks.
G'day, my name is Dr. Colin Hughes. I'm from City Rotary. We're very much involved with the My Place project, plus a new project called M Place, which we are working with the public-private partnership model to provide housing. My question, and I'm sorry I don't remember the lawyer's name, but the issue that I see, and we held a seminar in Midland 12 months ago for Housing Week, where we invited our respective federal and state politicians. We don't seem to be able to leverage money for the obvious solution, which is actually to provide a home. The federal government at the moment is providing $600 million per week in Sydney for the lockdown in COVID. So far in the West Australian this week, we had the tragic story of 2 38-year-olds, one who died of COVID in Sydney, and one who tragically died cold, wet and homeless on the streets of Perth. The other figure that was mentioned today was that 67 people have died on the streets from being homeless, whereas there have only been 12 deaths in Sydney out of this whole outbreak, this most recent outbreak in COVID. So can anyone explain, is there any money available through the federal government? And why cannot the state provide money? Michael West, the economist, has shown that if Western Australia charged the same mineral royalties as Queensland, over the last 10 years, we would have another $47 billion to spend on projects in Western Australia.
Okay, that's a mini presentation and a question. The question, I think, to Lee is around leveraging both Commonwealth and state monies, and maybe your experience with Housing All Australians in relationship to being able to, I mean, you don't in a sense even try and chase that money, is that right?
That's right. Our model is that we avoid the need for government financial subsidy altogether. And I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer the question as to how we might leverage state and, I mean, these are, I guess, policy decisions, aren't they? Yeah.
Maybe we come to Chris and talk a little bit about NIFIC then.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to that. Under a federated housing system, the state government's responsible for housing. So that's the conduit we need to make contact with in relation to where's the investment in social housing. The federal government has created NIFIC and other opportunities for us to invest in, but they want us to invest in affordable housing. So they've made that very clear that through the NAHA agreement, which they allocate a lot of money to the state government for delivery of social housing. They think that should be their responsibility. And through NIFIC, we have access to very affordable funds to deliver affordable housing.
Thanks very much. So, question from the Zoom.
For Michelle and Fleetwood, what is approximately the cost per square metre of your units?
Look, the answer to that is our cost isn't dissimilar to what's provided by traditional builders. So the real benefits of modular building, as I exemplified, are speed and capacity.
And maybe Michelle, if you could answer as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very difficult for either My Home or Fleetwood to give unit costs because a house does not exist in isolation. Once you deliver that house to site, it obviously has to have connections, it needs site works, it needs all sorts of off-site works done sometimes. There's other fees, authorities' fees involved or whatever. So you can't just say, oh, it's going to cost this much. I mean, even with our different sites, the cost of the homes varies from site to site and sometimes quite significantly, even at the basic level, like, you know, if it's a hilly site versus a flat site, significantly affects the site work costs.
Thanks very much. Was that a question? No, that's someone just getting their bag. I have a question actually, because a couple of the presentations talked a little bit about the ability for organisations like Housing All Australians, for example, to access pro bono services. And so I'm curious whether or not these kinds of models are scalable and exist without the opportunity, in a sense, of volunteerism and pro bono services. And maybe Michelle, My Home might be another example of that too.
Well, I guess as a property lawyer, I have an extensive network in the industry. So to my colleagues in other disciplines who are part of Housing All Australia, in each of the cities that we operate, we have extensive networks. And for us, we connect with purpose-led firms, consultancies, organisations, and have found so far people are more than willing to donate their time. I think it's always easier for people to donate time rather than money. And most organisations these days, you know, obviously, you know, it's easier to get support from larger organisations. I don't mean to suggest that a small business with 2 or 3 people could afford to donate significant time to pro bono services. I'm really talking about larger organisations here, just I'll be very clear about that. But there are enough of us who work in the sector to make a real difference. And as I say, so far, we've had enormous support and great enthusiasm. And I think, frankly, people within the organisations are calling out for these opportunities. Yeah.
And Michelle, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, sure. It's very interesting. I think with my home, as I said, we're about to announce the signing of our first land lease and construction is about to begin. Up until this point, everything has been pro bono. And that means legal services, very kindly supplied by Minter Alison, financial services by PwC, and on and on and on it goes. If you go into our website, there's a page of contributors and supporters, and we kept reducing the font size down and down and down because there were so many of them. But the reality is when you start building, a lot of those trades are one-man operations, a plumber, an electrician, and we cannot expect them to go on providing pro bono services. Our builder, Highbury Homes, has done an amazing job of securing deals with the big suppliers like James Hardie and West Pine and people like that. And we are delivering homes at the most tightest, cost-efficient way we can. But we cannot expect small businesses to do pro bono work. They'll help. But if we're talking about producing homes into the future on a very large scale, we are going to have to accept that we come back to industry standard. And we've been fortunate because we've been negotiating prices for trades and services. And a lot of people haven't chosen to increase their prices like the rest of the industry.
You asked specifically if this is scalable, and I didn't address that, and so I will. And I think the simple point to make is that absolutely it is. We don't, this is just a model that we're rolling out. Anyone's welcome to do it. We don't have to be involved. I mean, it's just bringing people together to further a common objective. Yeah.
Thanks. We've got a question from the audience and then one from the Zoom. Oh, we're going to run to the audience. Great.
Hi there, I'm Jasmina Brankovic and I work at National Disability Services. And my particular interest is housing for people with disabilities and NDIS participants. And I'm wondering whether or not there has been, or have you given any thought to investment in specialist disability accommodation, SDA? Has that crossed your mind? And if it has, what are the barriers that you've encountered in your thinking about that?
Anyone like to take that?
I'll answer that
because Chris will do that as well.
Sorry.
Oh, no, Michelle, go first.
I'll do a quick one and then I'll pass to you. With our first site at North Fremantle, 18 houses. One is a fully universal access house. The other houses are all designed to livable housing gold standard. So all the doorways, the access through the front door, circulation spaces all accommodate mobility. So yes, it's very much being addressed.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Foundation Housing, we've just commenced construction of a to SDA units in Bassendean. So we've knocked over an old property there and we've got 2 under construction as we speak. It's a pilot project for our organisation. Disability housing has, with the SDA subsidy, is significant. It represents a good opportunity to deliver more social housing because it's got a real subsidy to it to make it work. Our challenge to getting to where we've got to at this point has been finding the approved participants with their SDA and SIL provider. We've worked very closely with Active on that, and we've got 6 participants moving in. And the great thing about that project is the people who are moving into those properties next year have all been involved in the colour palette, the design, the layout of their room and of the house, so that it'll absolutely be their home for their life. So,
great, thank you. We have a question from Zoom, and I think there was another one from the audience. Yep, I'll come back to you.
Okay, thanks. A couple of comments from Evan Nunn over at Accord West End in Bunbury. He said for the audience, the cost of the tiny homes down there, it cost them about $80,000 with inputs per site and add another 20% for the in-kind support. So close to 100,000 for 3 on a triplex site, high spec leased land from the Salvation Army. And he also said, in response to your question, we have 1 of 3 that are disability inclusive designed in the Tiny Homes project. So to the question, how do we convince the WA government to build more social housing homes in volume like the 12,000 the Victorian government has committed to?
If you have a silver bullet, now is the time.
Yeah, look, Victoria's had 5.7 bill. Their project is significant, and housing infrastructure is the key. It is the missing link in all of the discussions we've had today. If we had the housing infrastructure, we wouldn't be having a lot of discussions we've been having. And we hold hope that the new minister has made representations that we have to sit and wait for the budget, and we're doing that. But all we can do is continue to raise the issue of housing and continue pushing the issues that we've heard today, because it's not going to reduce. The social housing waitlist won't contract. Once we open up our borders, there'll be more people coming back into the state. Once we open up international borders, there'll be more people coming into WA, and housing supply and housing infrastructure is just critical. And all we can do is just keep emphasising that at every opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I think it's useful just in terms of context, because we talk about Victoria's aspirational program a little bit. It does seem to provide, in terms of its target, something in the order of 6% of housing supply to be social and affordable housing. And our current targets under government are something more akin to 1%. And we'll wait to see what budget says and what happens as a result of that. But there is definitely an aspiration gap, we think, between the two. There's a question from the floor.
That was kind of my question as well, but perhaps I can twist it into a bit of a follow-on. Chris, in the sense of obviously your focus on needing to focus on affordable housing, in addition to budget, what are some of the policy changes that are needed to actually enable organisations like yours to focus on social and other housing as well?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. For us, to deliver social housing, which is what we would like to be doing, that is our priority, social housing. But social housing, if I use crude numbers, to deliver a house for $350,000, we borrow at 2% for NIFIC. Our interest costs are close to $7,000. Then you overlay rates, insurance, maintenance. It's a $12,000 to $14,000 cost, and the income's $12,000. So we operate in the red, where we fully debt fund a new social housing dwelling. Where it works is where the government transfers, or management transfers the title or the lease of the property over a long-term lease. We can leverage that cash flow. So for every 10 properties or 100 properties we receive, we can generate a 10 to 15% yield dividend. So if they gave us 100 properties, we could deliver between 10 and 15 new units of accommodation at no cost to the state government. And that's through leveraging NIFIC and other organisations. If there was a cash grant, capital grants, or interest-free loans, they're the sorts of mechanisms that we can then leverage to go and deliver new social housing. But in the absence of that subsidy, it's really hard for us to make the numbers work. And we've put those propositions to government, because the recurrent savings if the government transferred to us 1,000 properties, hypothetically, through this budget, we could then deliver 150 brand new social housing dwellings in perpetuity at no cost to the government. Plus we get the CRA. Plus the government has the recurrent savings of not that $15,000 maintenance cost or operating costs that they currently report. So there's significant benefits of that, but it's going to take the political will of the government of the day to make that decision.
Thanks, Chris. And we do know for a fact that WA is missing out on significant CRA inputs into the state as a result of the balance at the moment in terms of the assets. Does anyone else have a question from the floor? I'm just starting to I have to wind up in a second. I had a couple of last ones that we might just put to the members of the panel. One of the issues, in a sense, that we're talking about here are barriers and how we can overcome them. And in some respects, that might be around land, it might be around finance, it may be around construction methodology or time to delivery, etc. So I just wouldn't mind in a couple of minutes, if we don't have any more questions from each panelist, to maybe talk about the number one barrier that they're seeing at the moment within their own particular either organisation or field that might assist to unlock housing supply. You go first, you're holding the mic.
Great. As I just said, the biggest issue is investment. We need $1.5 billion to deliver 3,000 properties. We just need that investment. We need to have the government commit the capital, accept that that's what's required, and how they then, once they make that commitment, they can work with organisations like ours and others and say, well, how can we extend 1.5 into $1.9 million worth of investment? And we can work with them on that. But there's a number that's required. Let's invest that number and deliver those homes.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think our issue as a modular builder is market perception. So we've got to educate the market and develop the market that modular isn't temporary, it's not inferior in quality. It's a process to yield an outcome, and it's an efficient, effective and high quality process. So there's a body of work there for us to do. We're achieving it basically from the regions and moving back to the metro, but that's our biggest constraint at the moment.
At a very high level, I think one of the biggest barriers we face at the moment is that we're too reliant on government funding to solve all of our problems. And so I think the solutions that we're exploring and the economic study that we're undertaking are all aimed at identifying ways in which we can unlock value, create value for the private sector to deliver part of the solution that we're looking for, and to make it easier for them to do so. And also to encourage private investment at a very significant scale, as we see in other countries. It just doesn't exist in Australia.
Yep, exactly my sentiments. And having said that we are about to start a project on government land, cut the red tape. My home has been over a 3-year journey to get to this point. And I can say this without doubt, we could have had those houses built almost 2 years ago if we hadn't have gone through the torture of getting a land lease signed.
Well, good news. We've had confirmation the government is working on that, Michelle, and we expect some action on that shortly. So look, I'd like to thank the panel today, and join me in thanking the panel for their insights. Thank you. I'll just welcome back Michelle McKenzie now to the stage.
Thanks, Kieran. Now, Dominic, good news. We've got the Fleetwood video working. The bad news, we don't have the audio. So do you feel comfortable being the voiceover person while we show your video? Or would you prefer us to send a link? Okay, perfect. So I think we will just stop the video now so you don't get a sneak preview, and you can click on the link. Thanks, Heather. Okay, so we're at the coming to the end of the summit. So again, thank you to the panelists. So a big round of applause again. Now, so you've sat back and listened to some fabulous presentations. So we'd like to now get some payback. So as part of the Unlock Housing campaign, we've got some fantastic call flutes. And we would like, as the panelists said, we need to get the message to government that the community supports investment in housing. We've done polling, we know that's the case. But we would like you to put your hands up and to commit to having some call flutes. So if I think about your organisations, thousands of staff, hundreds of staff. So is there anybody in the room that has a front gate? Great. So Luke and person next to Luke, how many call flutes would you like? 5? Fabulous. Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that goes for the Dockers? Oh, okay. Anyone for the Eagles? Oh, great. Okay. So all the Collingwood supporters, put your hands up. No? All right. Okay. Does anyone have staff? Great. How many staff, Chris? So would you like 70 call flutes? Yeah. Brilliant. And Kieran? 10, and that's on top of the 10 you already have. Good man. That's what Chair of Shelter WA. You can have. And Mark Glasson, how many staff at Anglicare? 700? Can we put you down for some call flutes? Great. And John Boofler, how many staff do you have? Great. So, so we'll get a start. We'll get one for you. Leanne at Starrick, how many would you like? 10, brilliant. Yakwa. 5, brilliant. For all those young people, circle green. Yeah, you've been superstars. Now, Mission Australia, one of the best, largest organisations. How many, Linda? You take only, sorry, 10? Only 10. Yeah, Kieran's taking more. Kieran's taking 20. Anyone else like some core flutes? Right, you'll be getting an email. Oh, Rise, the fabulous Rise. How many would you like for your 500? 500. Great. So everyone else's order is cancelled and they're all That's great. And we have the wonderful Louise Giuliscio from Wacos. I know. I'm just giving you a free shameless plug, Louise. Just own it. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you. We do need, these are in the shelter office. It's an OSH issue, so thank you. Now, Gary from CHL, hiding there in the background. 5, or is that a hello? 5. Great, thank you. So, Cord West, yes, so the regions, we can get these out to you. So just zoom away and that would be brilliant. So core flutes, we just need to let government know this is an important issue. You can also contact your local MP. So Heather's got a link on our website. This is a long game. So we just need to constantly keep housing in the media, at government's attention, and local MPs. There's a lot of Labor backbenchers who would love to have the visit, and Shelter will be sending out some information packs on how we can support your local advocacy so you can raise the issue of housing with your local MPs. And again, I look at Anglicare, amazing staff. So just not sitting with the CEO, if we could get all of the staff in the community sector harnessed, that would just be brilliant. And of course, sharing your stories. We've got some fabulous stories online of people with lived experience talking about the impact of housing on them and their families. As service organisations, you have just got people walking through the door in crisis. If there's any opportunity that we can work with your communications team to amplify those stories, that would be fantastic. And again, please contact us and Heather, and she'll be sending through links so you can share your stories. So the other thing is, what's the date today? Anyone know the date? 28th of July. So for those wonderful members of Shelter, if you haven't joined, your previous membership lapses at the end of this month. For people who love the Shelter family and would like to become part of it, we would really encourage you to join Shelter WA. The board made a decision not to increase prices this year because of the impact of COVID. So please join with us. Members are our DNA. We work with our members to support the great work that they do. And the more members we have, again, the more we show government that this is an important, critical issue. So please join Shelter. Before closing, I'd like to acknowledge Brad Pettit, MLA, for attending today. Okay. It was great to have Brad in the room, so thank you. Big round of applause to all of you. Please clap yourselves. Thank you. Another cheery wave to the Zoom people. Thank you, Zoom people. Again, thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. We really appreciate your time and insights. And thank you again. Please enjoy the rest of your time and your day. And I hope you can work with us to unlock housing. Thank you.